Good morning. I want to start off simply for thanking the participants and the panelists for braving the weather today, the cold and the ice to log on today's webinar. Really appreciate going above and beyond. But in all seriousness, I want to welcome you to today's training on solar incentives for multifamily housing and affordable housing. My name is Rob Crowderoof. I'm CEO of Crowderoof Solar, solar consultancy based in New York City. And it's a great time to start talking about solar. Both start of years, we can prioritize efforts, plan for success, and there's some immediate opportunities in front of us today to consider how to lock in some solar incentives before they begin to sunset. So at that, I'd like to hand off to Nancy Anderson, our esteemed moderator, who's the former executive director of the Salin Foundation, dedicated to advancing useful knowledge for cities. And very excited for her to run today's show.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, participants. I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us to learn about solar incentives training for affordable multifamily housing. I think of today's event as the best title would be Let the Sunshine In. And there hasn't been as much sunshine recently as we might all hope for. So today's panel is really an occasion for optimism, education, and some celebration. We are panelists today, all of whom are experts and leaders in the field of affordable and multifamily housing and getting solar power into their projects and into their properties. We'll be speaking in depth. Since we have just 1 hour, I would like to very briefly introduce our panelists in the order of their presentation, and then we'll kick it off at 10:45. We will begin our Q&A segment, and we'll be wrapping things up at 11. Rob Crowderoof is our host and organizer today, and he is the founder and CEO of Crowderoof Solar. Tim Goder is the Solar Program Associate at the New York State Department of Homes and Community Renewal, and I know we'll have lots of very timely and very useful information. Patrick Logan is the principal at Lumley & Wolf Companies and is out there in the real world making solar power happen for affordable multifamily housing. And Xiomara Pedraz is the Chief Real Estate Development Officer for the Sisters of Charity Housing Development Corporation, and has some real solar wins under her belt and is looking forward to sharing that good news and that how-to with you all. So let's begin with let's begin with Rob and take it from there.
Thanks, Nancy. So we pull our collective deck up here. Slideshow. There we go. As a brief introduction to our work, my firm has been around for 13 years. We are real estate solar owners reps working really not quite exclusively with affordable housing, predominantly in New York State. And a lot of our work has been focused on portfolio-based retrofits, as well as consulting for new construction, looking at ways to pair the wins for affordable housing in the context of broader affordable housing preservation goals. Our approach is essentially providing full solar expertise that a solar development shop typically would have, in partnership and in support of affordable housing providers. So that'd be project development and construction, in-house engineering, project finance and underwriting. So all under one roof, there's a set of solutions. This is important when it comes to integrating. I won't go into every step of the services, but what's interesting is to consider how solar incentives and leveraging solar incentives is necessary, sort of a necessary step just about at each step of the solar process, from feasibility assessment to design engineering, procurement, all the way through consideration of permitting and interconnection, and of course documenting that, incentives and tax strategy. So I'm going to spend most of our time today talking about what the solar incentive landscape looks like federally and at the state level. There are moving pieces, but the good news is there is actionable certainty. And I think that's really the main message of today. So at the federal level, the baseline is the federal clean energy investment tax credit. This is a 30% base tax credit for any solar project. It's an income tax credit, or it's refundable for not-for-profits through a program called direct pay. This tax credit is stackable on paper up to 70% with other adders. Frequently, that's achieved through adding one or two additional adders. In particular, the Federal Clean Energy Low-Income Bonus Program. We've had great success helping partners secure. This is a 10 to 20% bonus that's targeted for low-income communities and or affordable housing providers with federal regulated affordable housing. This incentive is stackable. So that means we get from 30 up to 40 or 50% tax credit. And there's an application required. Talk a little bit about some of those considerations in a forthcoming slide. There's a domestic content bonus that can get another 10% potentially. There's an energy community bonus for projects that are in areas where fossil fuel power plants have been disappearing. So for New York, you can look at upstate New York, some parts of the mid to western New York State can benefit from this program. No application required for that one. So we can look at a 30 to 40 or 50% tax, or even 60% tax credit for some projects. Safe harbor is a really important consideration. Being able to lock in that tax credit by essentially beginning construction, depending on the definition of beginning construction, but for multifamily and projects of these size, then we're looking at incurring 5% of total project cost before July 4th. So that's a really important deadline to pay attention to. One other incentive for those who are in the for-profit arena, there's makers or 100% bonus depreciation that comes into play. And lastly, for all projects, there's a FEOC or foreign entities of concern requirement that needs to be met for all projects moving forwards. Avoiding certain foreign entities and meeting certain production requirements that avoid production in certain countries. It's possible, it's not necessarily a huge issue to comply. Some of the documentation is important to pay attention to, but those requirements become more stringent in years moving forwards. So to talk about the low-income bonus tax credit, and then this program, when you look at Category 1 incentive, that's your 10% bonus. Category 3 is your 20% bonus. Category 3 are for projects that are in that have federal regulatory agreements in place, participating in a federal program, let it be HUD agreements or LIHTC and so forth. There's a list to work through. Category 1 are projects located in designated low-income areas. There are different requirements to be able to apply. Some are require a contractor agreement. Some you may require a power purchase agreement or a lease. Sometimes an interconnection application is required, sometimes it isn't. We've walked through this program successfully over the last 3 years. All of our 106 applications have been approved. So there's a lot of understanding of rules and processes, but it is possible to work through that program. I won't spend much time on the state programs, but I think folks are generally familiar with NYSERDA, who provides grant funding. There's a property tax abatement. Tim will talk about HCR's program. And for affordable housing projects that are not using a prescriptive pathway to comply with local law 97, then solar may contribute to your local law 97 compliance as well. So let's talk timing for a minute. All projects from here on out, as I said, need to comply with the foreign entity of concern requirements. The bonus tax credit program for low-income communities opens February 2nd, so next week. There's an initial 30-day window to apply. The program will be open until the beginning of August, but we'd like to get applications out the door to the first 30-day window when all applications are considered together. We can help walk you through where there's maybe a little leeway and where there's not, timing-wise. The safe harbor deadline is critical. You must incur 5% of project costs. That can be hard engineering toward construction or materials, right? There are different ways to comply. So again, though we're not we're not accountants, we're not legal, from a solar perspective, we can help you understand what's possible in collaboration with your tax professionals. The solar incentive does sunset. It goes away December 31st, 2027, unless projects are safe harbored by July 4th, 2026, at which point in time, actually that date needs to be pushed back to December 31st, 2030. We'll update that slide for distribution. There's a 4-year time frame after safe harbor to be able to place projects in service. Typical returns. Returns can be very strong for these projects. We're frequently looking if you have a 50% ITC and you have a New York Sun incentive, 1 to 3 year simple paybacks. So this is a real opportunity. There's possible leverage outside capital as well, let it be to bridge the tax credit or to have term loans against the project or a combination of the two. IRRs, we can look at 30+%. So again, when we're looking at traditional commercial real estate investments, solar is very competitive in the current landscape. If we think about a typical project, for example, if there's a 50 kilowatt project and that may cost $200,000, then the tax credit at a 40% level will cover $80,000. New York Sun, if it's a community solar project in New York, will cover another $100,000. So that leaves a gap of $20,000 for ownership equity contribution, or 10%. And that can be recouped, again, very quickly. And then it's cash flow that can support the project from there on out. So key considerations in moving forwards. There are moving pieces. There are engineering questions. There are procurement questions. Let it be for a mid-cycle as its own kind of process, because there are fewer moving pieces. Certainly if a project is undergoing a refinancing, repositioning, then there's a design team. There are other deadlines to work within, which may perfectly match up. They may not perfectly match up with these safe harbor deadlines. So it's really important to look closely at your development timeline, to sit down with that in the context of your solar project, to make sure that we're able to apply and secure for the bonus tax credit, to safe harbor, as well as make sure that we're working within the context of your broader development project. Of course, coordination with your professionals is going to be really important. Your design and development teams, working with the licensed professionals, legal, accounting in particular, as well as any lending institutions, whether they're folks who you're already working with or folks who we may help to set you up with a mid-cycle project, for example. Then these different moving pieces are really important to manage so that the solar project becomes an additive rather than something that can cause, without following the right processes, then there's some opportunity for the solar to potentially become an issue if you're not really paying attention to these safe harbor deadlines closely. So at that, really looking forward to Q&A. I know there's a lot here, but I'd like to pass along to Tim Goodare from ACR.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. As Rob and Nancy have said, I'm Tim Goodare. I'm the Solar Program Associate here at HCR. I sit within the Sustainability Unit, so you all may be familiar with the work we do under that unit. I'm honored to be invited here to talk through our solar programming at HCR. Next slide, please. I assume most of you are familiar with HCR and the work we do as a state agency. I'll just start off with our mission. The mission is to build, preserve, protect affordable housing and increase home ownership across the state. We work with a variety of programs and offer a variety of programs from single family up to large multifamily properties and Mitchell-Lamas. And multifamily projects that include solar are always highlighted by the governor's office and our agency. So there is broad general support to include solar in development projects. Next slide, please. So last year, we published our sustainability guidelines alongside our new design guidelines. So these resources encompass baseline requirements, baseline requirements and guidelines for all multifamily projects coming to HCR for financing. And there are new solar requirements within these updates. Again, solar is not required, but we do have two baseline requirements. So just as a baseline, all project teams must complete a solar feasibility assessment. And we launched a new tool that teams can use to meet this requirement, the solar evaluation tool that I'll talk more about in a minute. And then the second requirement is solar readiness design if a team is not pursuing solar. So we ask projects to maximize as many solar readiness principles as possible. And then, of course, the stretch goal is to include solar in the project scope, and we encourage more and more teams to do that. Next slide, please. So last year, we launched our solar evaluation tool program. This was in the spring, I believe, of 2025, all with the goal of encouraging early assessment and viability of solar for a project so that the project teams can include solar and incorporate solar into the design process if feasible. So we do offer, within this program, we do offer free dedicated technical assistance with our partners at Cadmus, who, through this tool, we help identify sources, discuss the incentive landscape, eligibility for those incentives, a lot of which Rob walked through just in his slides. And then as the agency, we recommend solar if a property can support a solar system larger than 4 kW, and if the payback is 15 years or less. So within our tool, we have technical feasibility and then financial feasibility. Next slide, yeah. And then we've also developed and published our new solar technical requirements. The requirements are essentially guidance to help ensure systems perform as they are designed and deliver the modeled savings. So it's really a list of necessary steps a project must take in order to mitigate risk during construction and operations. So you can see here just O&M contracts, monitoring, equipment warranties. We do recommend production guarantee as an additional safety measure. And then throughout the whole construction process, myself, our partners at Cadmus, the sustainability unit, we review and confirm construction documents are all in compliance with the sustainability guidelines and these technical requirements if solar is incorporated as well. Next slide. And then one quick funding notice. I think Rob briefly mentioned this. Late last year, we launched a couple of new programs under our Climate Friendly Homes Fund. So right now, this is the only solar funding we have available. This is through our standalone CEI program, which is for electrification of mid-cycle multifamily properties. but we were able to include a significant solar adder when paired with electrification. That's 5,000 per unit. You can see here the different scopes, but the solar is 5,000 per unit. And we do have a webinar discussing this whole program on our sustainability webpage, but you can certainly reach out to us. We are taking applications for this program now. And then the last slide, I'll also tease a new funding program that we are developing with our partners at NYSERDA. Hoping to launch soon, but it will be essentially emergency funding for projects in our pipeline to enable them to meet the new deadlines that Rob covered for the federal incentives. And then our webpage, it's linked here. You can search HCR Solar, I believe, too, and it comes right up. We have a bunch of resources, the solar evaluation tool, the whole Excel file. We have the solar technical requirements, FAQs, several other one-page resources that's available there. And then you can always reach out to myself directly, or we do have a solar-specific inbox with the email address on the slide here. And with that, I'll offer my thanks, and then I'll pass it over to Pat. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. I'll just start off by introducing Lemley. What you see on that first slide is one of our solar projects, Vermilia, in Upper Manhattan. And this is here because it's kind of typical of the way we've done solar in the past. And that's, at repositioning or a rehabilitation, usually with financing from New York City that locks in long-term affordability. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Lemley. Lemley was founded in 1938 by property owners who were managing their properties in Upper Manhattan. In our current incarnation, we've partnered with the city and state and other intermediaries since the early 80s to preserve affordable housing. We're a full-service real estate firm, developer, contractor, and property manager. Just to give a little sense of what we've been able to accomplish over the last decade on the preservation side, 98 properties with a total development cost of over $420 million. And on the new construction side, about 530 units with a total development cost of just over $300 million. And I included a few examples here of both, again, our work to date. On the left-hand side, VR Affordable. This was a project that was repositioned through HPD's Year 15 program, where we were able to add solar to 5 of 7 rooftops. And Sunnyside is a project that's in construction. It's a affordable project, low to moderate income in Queens, where we will be bringing solar again as part of the repositioning, as part of the resources that are available for the overall repositioning of the project, the overall rehabilitation of the project. Next slide, please. So just to give you a sense, again, where we are with solar at Lemley, 5 completed solar thermal projects. We've actually moved away from solar thermal in recent years. Part of the issue there has been upkeep of those systems and finding people who are willing to do that work. But we do still have a number of solar thermal projects. We've moved more towards PV, having completed 4 projects, and also 2 in the pipeline, as I mentioned earlier. Again, typically we have incorporated solar as part of an execution with New York City and New York State, 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credit repositionings, or HPD's participation loan program as 2 examples. Those projects early on were often undertaken out of hard cost contingency savings, but more recently, as the city and state move to kind of really incentivize solar in these projects, they've been part of the typical rehabilitation financing. just mentioning a few challenges as we kind of move to trying to do more solar and sometimes outside of a repositioning. It's difficult to use these resources for mid-cycle properties that aren't headed towards an HPD or HCR repositioning. As these properties get larger, and we'll talk about this, we have to look closely at our own use for the solar tax credit and depreciation. I think on the plus side, firms like Crowder Solar have been adept at locking in federal credits, and we continue to work through federal incentive challenges and execution complexity. And next slide, I want to talk a little bit about an upcoming project with HCR. So Finley House, excuse the typo there, is a 239-unit, 14-story Mitchell-Lama, scheduled to close on a very significant rehab that includes electrification of heating and cooling, new kitchens and baths, and EIFS cladding on the exterior of the property. This one's a bit of a hybrid. This is not being funded completely from subsidy that's being used for the rest of the rehab. HCR, because that subsidy is scarce, HCR has asked us to look at identifying resources outside of typical rehab subsidy. We've been partnering with Rob and his team to implement net metering at the site, which will benefit the property with a lower electricity rate. Next slide, please. I wanted to put up where we are right now. I think we're in a pretty good place, actually. Sources and uses on this project. You can see total uses there are about $461,000. This is a tilt-up system, over 70 kilowatt. So it's a pretty relatively large system, at least compared to the ones that we've done in the past. Again, this is a great site. It's a 14-story building, so there are no real shade issues to be dealt with at the site. Where we are in the financing right now, if you look at on the sources side, I think we're in a pretty good place. As Rob mentioned earlier in his presentation, we're bringing in over 180,000 in the ITC, and Loan A is a bridge loan. It gets us to that ITC, which comes in year one. In a typical year, 50% of NOI is used to service Loan B, which is a 12-year loan at 7%. Right now, cash on cash without depreciation is around 5%. We're looking closely at how we can utilize depreciation so that cash on cash return increases. We're also looking here, and we've highlighted other grants, 75,000, to bring in additional grants to really reduce the time that equity is out. And this becomes more important as we think about larger projects. Next slide, please. What we've been working on, again, outside of executions that happen at repositioning or one-off executions that use other solar incentives like Finley, is looking at how we do a large portfolio project to impact, a much larger part of our portfolio. We manage over 200 properties, over 7,500 units. So there's a lot out there that, if it's not part of a repositioning cycle, really doesn't get the attention, a lot of opportunity for solar. And so that's what we're trying to do here, working with Rob and also working with NYSERDA and the state that have been supportive. We have a mix of older and new construction properties that are very viable for PV solar. We're currently looking at 30 of those properties, over 1,300 units. We're really looking at trying to execute a 1 megawatt portfolio solar project. Average would be about 33 kilowatts for each site. We're moving forward with a grant from NYSERDA to do utility bill analysis, design options, financial modeling, again with Crowder Solar, our special purpose entity formation, and also looking to lock in the tax credits as has been mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Benefits are obviously a lower rate for the property tax abatements, and also building in our pro forma maintenance for the site so that it doesn't all fall on property management. Some of the challenges here, but I call them challenges, but I think we're going to find a way to get there, is, looking at a project of this size, over $4.5 million, equity is 5 to 7%. So to make sure that equity can come back in a relatively short amount of time. Again, working through our appetite on a much larger scale for the tax credit and depreciation. Part of this will involve looking at project cost savings, sourcing lower interest debt. Just to give you an example, on the Finley project, we're plugging 7.5% on the debt right now. Reducing that debt really has a significant impact on bringing that equity back in. And then also on a project of this size, finding an equity investor. And I think that's my last slide. With that, I'll turn it over to Xiomara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Xiomara Pedraza, as mentioned, from Sisters of Charity Housing Development Corporation. We are a nonprofit affordable housing developer. We have over 1,500 units and 14 to 15 projects in Staten Island, Harlem, and Rockland County. And we were started by nuns, just responding to the needs of the community and affordable housing, mostly doing senior 202 properties, and then going to supportive formerly homeless, serving supportive formerly homeless families, and now multifamily as well. So I'm going to talk about a specific project, and I don't have slides, so this will be a nice experiment on my oration skills. But we just completed a solar project with the help of Kratos and team in Staten Island called Joseph House. And this is a HUD-assisted 202 property serving 75 low-income seniors located in Staten Island. The building was originally built in the 90s, and it was undergoing a repositioning. So we were doing a comprehensive rehab with state financing. However, we separated the solar project, so it was two separate transactions. So in this case, we did two systems. We had a net metering system of about 70 kilowatts, which offset 100% of the common area electricity. And then we did a community solar or front of the meter system, which was 200 kilowatts, which feeds the grid and provides direct bill credits to tenants. And we estimate that tenants will be saving around $20,000 to $30,000 annually in utility costs. And from start to finish, I would say it took about 2 years. We had to secure approval from HUD first, since it is a 202 property. And then as we were closing on financing with the state, ensuring that all of the regulations, the regulatory agreement and compliance wouldn't conflict with our solar project. We had applied in early 2025 and received the bonus tax credit. And then once some of the roof work was done, we were able to close on a bridge loan, which we self-financed, to install the solar system and achieve permission to operate by the end of last year. So we're anticipating we'll receive the direct pay ITC credits this year, along with the NYSERDA New York Sun incentive. And those incentives together cover about 80% of the total cost. And so the rest would be paid back through the savings. The payments from the electricity that we generate from the community solar as well as the net metered system. And we set up a separate entity to own the solar. So we have an entity, Charity Solar, who will operate, maintain the solar itself. And that really takes the responsibility and all the risks off of the project itself. And I think it was one of the key parts that helped us get approval from HUD, who really cares about, tenant, whether it's going to adversely impact tenants or benefit them, as well as the project. And in an alignment with the Treasury rules, the net metering portion, the income generated from that, a part of it will also go into a tenant benefit fund, which we'll use for emergency and sort of like another reserve for the project, which is great. And then, of course, the tenants who sign up for the community solar are also saving on their electricity bills. So tenants in the project benefit in both ways. In addition, we're obviously lowering our carbon emissions, which is great. I think in terms of lessons learned, I think like Patrick was saying, mid-cycle projects, we've been trying to look at ways to integrate solar across our portfolio outside of just, regular repositioning or transactions that we're doing with either HPD or HCR in the state. And it's been interesting trying to, find financing available or ways to kind of fill the gap. Because in this case, we were able to self-finance a portion of it. But that's a risk, right? And that means less money that we can dedicate to other affordable housing projects. And so we definitely don't want to continue to do that on a large scale, or I don't think we'd have the capacity to do that on a large scale. And so that's an area that I see as being critical. We are working on a solar project now in Rockland County, where we're getting funded through the state, but it's through a resiliency program. And that is a mid-cycle project specifically for areas that were impacted by Hurricane Ida. And in Rockland County, there was a lot of power loss. And so we were able to, use that as a catalyst moment to apply for and get solar, as well as a backup solar batteries system. I think it's important to engage agencies early on, and get all of and investors, if you have a LIHTC property, just kind of explain the plan and have them understand, what the potential risks are, and that there's really no downside to the asset or the tenants. And I think it's helpful to have folks that can provide technical assistance and legal assistance around the regulatory side. So yeah, that's our project.
Thank you, Rob and Tim and Patrick and Xiomara, for such a rich and detailed and actionable set of descriptions and perspectives on what it means to be able to bring solar to our housing. Two things before I turn it back over to all of you to answer audience questions. First, audience out there, please add your questions to the chat function, and we'll start. We'll start with that momentarily. If you have a question for the general panel, that's fine. If you have a question for a particular panelist, that's also great. I would like to start this Q&A segment by asking any and all of our panelists a question about definition. People who are really experts in this field probably already know the answers, but I also know they can be complicated, and that is for purposes of obtaining solar financial or technical assistance from the feds or from New York State, and let's just limit it to New York State for current purposes. What does it mean? What is the definition or definitions of affordable housing that would qualify for these various programs? And secondly, and probably a related term, what are the relevant, actionable definitions for low income housing? And are they different? Rob, maybe you could start with that.
Sure. Thanks, Nancy. Well, there are two different sets of incentive programs that support low-income projects. Probably a third now with HCR having several programs at the federal level. Then there are two buckets. One, the incentive specifically around affordable housing requires that the project participate in a federal program. So again, LIHTC and HUD, PRAC buildings and project-based Section 8 and others are good examples of properties that would qualify for that 20% bonus. Others are geographically based for the 10% bonus. But if we're talking about affordable, then that's the federal definition. NYSERDA's definition is much more inclusive of federal as well as essentially projects that participate in state and city programs in a much more broad sense, probably how most practitioners, affordable housing practitioners in New York State would think about defining sort of regulated affordable housing. And that's for their New York Sun program. And then Tim would need to speak specifically about HCR's program, which is newer.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. On our end, we are designing a lot of our programs with the eligibility requirement where any applicant has to have a regulatory agreement. So for us, it has to be regulated affordable housing. And that's, like Rob said, under the LIHTC programs, HUD, USDA, Section 8, there's a whole list of eligible regulatory agreements that we would accept. I think I'll leave it at that. I'm newer to the affordable space, but that's how we're designing a lot of our programs. Is as long as there is a regulatory agreement in place, it would be qualified and eligible for most, if not all, of our programming.
Tim, could you speak very briefly to programs that HCR makes available or other New York State entities that don't qualify as affordable or low-income housing for solar assistance?
Yeah, this is where market rate projects are different. That's certainly outside of the HCR scope. Rob, do you have ideas on this one?
Or maybe Tim also could weigh in on this, if it's appropriate. Pat?
Sorry, Nancy, could you ask that question one more time?
In your experience, have all of your projects fit under the low income or affordable legal rubric, or do you have some projects that have succeeded that have been more mixed in their occupancy?
We, like a good example, but it would still be largely categorized as affordable. We're working on a project now, which is a income averaging project where the incomes will range from 30% to 80% of the area median income, and we're able to bring solar to that project. But I would say for the most part, it usually is working with the city. You definitely tied to a project with a regulatory agreement, and we haven't necessarily yet brought solar to market rate, although we haven't really developed that many market rate projects, one or two. But I do know that those federal resources would still be available for those projects.
Thank you for that. On behalf of everyone here, thank you for that clarification. Rob, I wanted to turn it back to you because I know you have wide-ranging experience with this.
Yeah, on the market rate side, then there are some incentives that may be more readily available to market rate. We spoke about depreciation, so that would be perhaps more of a for versus not for profit question. But presumably market rate, we're talking about for-profit developers and property owners. Also, the New York City property tax abatement, which covers, I didn't spend time on, but that covers 30% of the project cost in New York City once you take out the New York Sun grant. And so that's almost doubling the value of the tax credit, essentially, right? That's a big bonus, and that comes in over 4 years. So 7.5% the value of the project for 4 years. So there are some incentives that maybe are lower with affordable or less pure bonuses. Also, if those projects are in low-income areas, they still qualify for that 10% bonus. So projects can still pencil out very well if they're not in a sort of more traditionally regulated affordable context. The challenge actually is translating solar into the affordable context, much more so rather than the other way around, where projects are easier to pencil and there are fewer regulatory restrictions for making projects work.
Thank you. That's really informative. I'm going to turn to Samaro in a moment. I wanted to once again ask participants, anyone who's got questions, please add them through the chat function. We're here to answer your questions. Sio, I wanted to ask you, given your experience both in New York City and in other parts of New York State, at least Rockland County, whether you've found some jurisdictions are easier to relate to and others have different kinds of rules, or whether everywhere you've worked in New York State has been comparable in terms of application and process.
Yeah, so our experience in Rockland County with solar is still early on. But I do think if you can do it in New York City, you can probably do it in other parts of the state. New York City tends to be a little bit more bureaucratic and difficult. I think Rockland has a utility that is, I think, shared or similar to Con Ed companies. So I think we'll expect a similar process in terms of getting approvals and a permission to operate. But I think a lot of that is really dependent on the solar developer, the EPC that you work with. So in Staten Island, we've worked with Accord, and they were very good about doing their diligence and what needed to happen in order to get the solar up and running. And I think, going through that bid process, interviewing contractors, making sure they have the right experience and they have the experience in that particular region that you're looking to do the solar is important, because every region has, different characters involved. So that's always a good way to start. Oh, you're muted, Nancy.
Thank you for your elegance, eloquence, and informativeness and honesty on that. That was very, very helpful. Next question up, I think this may be for Patrick and for Rob. what advice would you give to property owners, whether in multifamily or individual housing? What advice would you give to people who are interested but haven't yet quite gotten over the threshold to yes? What's the best way to get to yes when it comes to solar installations?
So I would just jump in with a relatively easy answer on this one. As you might have gleaned from the beginning of Rob's presentation, and also Tim's, that the incentives are complicated. And so to reach out to somebody like Rob and Crowderoff to start with, to see, what incentives might work for your project. And, Rob's looking at projects across the city, varying sizes. And he also is doing a lot of work with the affordable community. So I think Rob's a good place to start. And I would turn it over to Rob to add anything to that.
You're on mute.
Thank you. I was saying, thanks, Pat. I appreciate the kind words. I think, well, two things. One is insofar as numbers drive decisions, then projects do pencil. And I'm kind of maybe stringing together some other questions from Q&A here. Projects pencil out very well right now. We're looking at short returns. So getting familiar, talking to peers, right? Pat, Gio, we work with Catholic Charities on 17 projects. There are others who we haven't worked with, but have had, there's an industry out there. Perhaps you have peers and colleagues. I think the vast majority of folks have had positive experiences in different ways. As Pat was saying, the challenge of this moment is timing and complexity, right? And so to simplify that just for a minute, there are a couple questions. So Nancy, if you don't mind my pulling up a slide that someone asked in the Q&A around the safe harbor deadline, right? So this is really like the $1 million question when it comes to solar right now. One of the questions was what happens after the safe harbor deadline or after the tax credit goes away? What do projects look like? We just don't know, right? They're probably not going to look better than they do now. Right? Like there's limited funding these days at the state and city governments that are trying to plug in. The opportunity really is locking in, paying 5% to project cost before July 4th of this year, right? Incurring 5%. It can't just be a deposit. You can't just pay a contractor 5%. You have to pay for materials or soft cost engineering. Depending on your project, if you do construction, you may not want to put a whole lot down on materials because you're looking at a construction timeline of, going through design, development, construction would be 36, 48 months, right? But the design engineering might be more palatable and something you're prepared to do anyway. Vice versa, sometimes it's easier to purchase some materials. And locking that in by July 4th, it gives time for the project to develop. Right? Regardless of ownership, even if a project is financed, you're typically looking at, 10-ish% equity contribution minimum. Most lenders are going to require at least that. So being able to have 4 years to place a project in service after putting that initial amount down with a project that pencils today is going to make a big difference. A complementary question, and I'll put it back out to Q&A, but complementary questions, what are the biggest risks associated? I think something to pay a lot of attention to is not just to put like 5.0% down on a project, right? One, making sure they're qualified expenses, but two, more like 7-8% of project costs can allow for, if there's some price changes to a project, allowing for there to be some change that is within the safe harbor requirements, right? Because you really can't go below 5. Right, then you're not going to get the tax credit. So really paying very close attention to those rules, and the timing is, allows for that. If someone's considering now's really the time, or we just don't know what's gonna happen. Other than the 2027 for projects that haven't started now, the supply chain is going to be very challenging. The labor is going to be constrained in 2027. The industry is, we've seen this over and over again when tax credits phase down. The industry is going to be constrained next year. And to not assume that just because you start a project at the beginning of next year, it'll easily be able to be completed at the end, even if on paper it could be. So,
Great.
Rob, if I could just add one more. I noticed that Andrew asked about providers for debt on these projects, both for the bridge loan to the ITC and also the term loan. Do you have any thoughts on that?
yeah, there are a community of providers that are interested in financing projects like this, right? So we're looking at essentially a New York City-based green bank as one potential source. There's a CDFI that's interested in lending in the space. There's a traditional solar provider that is maybe a little more bullish on some aspects, pushing DSCR and other components, but maybe a little less familiar with affordable, right? So it's worth shopping, especially for smaller projects. Easier transactions. You just want to be kind of in and out. But if we're looking at a large multi-million-dollar project, then there are different lending sources to bring a project like this to the table to make sure you have the right deal along with the right counterparty.
Great, thank you. We have so many really interesting and well-informed questions coming in. I'm going to just pick a couple of them in the interest of time. If a real estate owner has a large portfolio of buildings and they want to qualify for the 30% federal tax credit, is there a way for them to commence construction, term of art, by July of this year and to complete the construction over several years? What are the benefits of starting before July versus waiting?
Well, commencing before July, commencing construction is the technical term for safe harbor, right? And but you don't actually, for projects of the scale that we're talking about, right below, I believe it's 1.5 megawatts AC as a threshold. Tim's giving me a nod there. Then, and we're well below that. We're looking at like 33 kilowatts, maybe a couple hundred kilowatts at a time, right? For projects of that size, then engineering costs as well as hard costs, more traditionally hard costs, but either can qualify, fit the definition of starting construction, right? And so that's where beginning construction, as per the rules and the definitions at that 5% level are able to lock in. Otherwise, it's very difficult to have certainty around finishing a project before the tax credit deadline in 2027.
Thank you. Okay, and our last question, and due to time, it's a very interesting one to me. The aggregated community solar project is exciting. When do you anticipate completion, and what is the criteria to apply for participation in the community solar program? And what amount of bill discount do you project? I don't know who of the four of you are the best to answer that, so I'll just toss it out there.
Well, and Gio spoke with some about their community solar project, where we definitely can talk about the project with Pat, but I also think what's great about the Sisters of Charity project is it's done, right? So it's interesting maybe with Pat and I can talk, but I also think that it's worth some time for Gio to be able to talk specifically about what you did. I think it's really an amazing model of what you did also on site to sign up your tenants.
Yes. So we completed our solar project, and we had a campaign to sign up residents. So these are all low-income seniors who live in the building. And we got, I think, definitely over maybe a majority of the seniors who were interested in signing up to enlist in the solar program. And they're expected to get about 10% discount bill credits on their utilities. So they'll be benefiting from that savings, which is great. And we continue to get residents who ask about it and want to sign up. So it's been pretty popular, and we weren't really sure whether it would be a hit or not, but it seems that folks are interested.
Over half of the power of the allocation, as well as the financial benefit, are going to tenants within the building. And I believe there are nearly 50 tenants who signed up over a couple
Yeah.
days of a campaign.
Wow.
So yeah, really an amazing.
That is such a high point and such good news. And I think also, due to the interest of time, leave on a high point. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Simara, Timothy, and Patrick, and all of our participants for letting the sunshine in today. It's most welcome.